forgive me this afternoon, but the light is failing here on the south coast of the UK, and I didn't want to let any of you down. So here we are with our Rose Live Prune Along sessions, live here from the North Lodge Cottage Garden. I, of course, am the gardener, Ben. Now, these particular tutorials are really, really very difficult to do here on YouTube. I want to continue to drive my platform here on YouTube wherever possible. The media tends to roll for much, much longer here on YouTube than it does on, for instance, Instagram. But going live on this particular platform is really very one-dimensional for myself. I don't get to see who is actually joining. I don't get to see any comments. And for some reason at the moment, the screen is cut in half and I've only got half a screen. So do forgive me if I disappear off screen at several different times. I will endeavour to make sure that I'm looking at the camera and make sure that it's remained focused for you. So today you've joined me for the second of my live prune along videos. This is actually the third one of these. This particular video has been done already over on Instagram. So if you want to have a look at it there, obviously you can find me on all platforms. I am _Gardener Ben across all platforms. I'm uploading much more information to Instagram than I am to YouTube. So more daily doses of everything that I'm doing out and about in the garden. But just to refresh, one or two things, if those of you that are joining me today haven't done this before. Once again today we're going to be pruning a bush rose. We're actually going to be pruning a Bring Me Sunshine. It is a first year plant, and the audience over on Instagram found this particular tutorial really, really very useful. So we're touching base on how to deal with a rose if, for instance, if you bought a potted rose in 2022 and it's its first full season in the ground, and or you bought a bare root rose at the end of 2021 into 2022, and it's its first full season. You're now left with what we call a juvenile plant. I want to take this opportunity to, before we start going over equipment and pruning techniques again, to reassure everybody that if you do have one of these juvenile plants, they are going to act very much like your teenager or your puppy. They are going to look a little unruly and a little untidy for a while. They're going to get into a stage where they're coming into their teens and their feet might be a little bit big, they might be a bit gangly. It takes a while, so please don't think that your roses are going to end up looking like, for instance, the first video we did, which here on YouTube was the country parson. That was a mature specimen coming into its fourth year. All the training and hard work is done, so it's a very, very simple pruning technique. So today with Bring Me Sunshine, we're looking at a plant that's literally been in the ground, coming to the end of its first full year. Was bought by myself and supplied by David Austin Roses as a potted plant. It's got very, very nice and large this year. A little behind the scenes tip, if you're one of those people that likes to watch my rose reviews and enjoy my information about the top 20 of my most recommended David Austin roses, expect Bring Me Sunshine, the release from 2022, to storm well up into that category this year. It is an absolutely outstanding addition to the David Austin collection, an absolute beauty. It is fairly large, so there's going to be plenty of pruning to do today. So before we actually have a look at the pruning technique, and before we get there, I'm going to have to apologise. There's going to be some very undignified camera angles of myself today, and I'm going to have to fumble around with the camera and actually the tripod to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So we've done this before, but we need to talk first of all about protection. You do need to make sure that you are wearing old clothing, something that is tough that's going to stop your arms, for instance, getting scratched up. I'm a very, very experienced gardener. I've been doing this for 28 years with this year, which is absolutely staggering. I don't know where the time's gone. I feel very, very old indeed. However, make sure that you're wearing old clothes. Roses, by their very nature, are covered in thorns to protect them from predators and things eating them. So do make sure that you're wearing something on your forearms. I'm not going to do today, but if you're inexperienced or you've got particularly soft skin and you don't have raw hide like myself, make sure that you're wearing something long on your actual forearms themselves. Gloves, completely up to you which ones you go for. There's plenty on the market. These lightweight rubber with a nylon top on the top are quite good. However, I find they actually do get caught up in the plant quite often and you'll end up getting yourself tangled up. For more heavy work, I do have these, and for full disclosure, these were actually gifted to me by henchmen. I didn't buy them, but I'd have no problem with parting with my own money for buying these. These are the henchman gloves. Got really large hands. I'm an XXL in a glove, and these fit me really, really nicely. A nice strong leather palm and gloves with a nice stretchy red and a gauntlet round the wrist, which is really important for keeping them safe and secure. I'm going to be wearing these today as we prune Bring Me Sunshine, because it's a beautiful rose, but it is particularly spiky. Right, we spoke on my first tutorial, we spoke on several occasions about these. Your choice of weapon when it comes to pruning, and putting everything into your hands. You are the person that's going to be training your roses or your fruit trees, whatever it is that you're pruning. You are the one in control, and the plant is going to act under your will. Choose the secateurs that are right for me. For me, it is always the Falco. For me, it's because I've got a large hand, it's the Falco number 8. These are obviously relatively expensive, but there's two different types of secateur on the market. You've got bypass secateurs, which are these, where the blade, this bit, goes past the anvil and creates a really nice clean cut. And you've also got anvil secateurs, where the blade comes down onto the anvil, and sometimes they can be a little on the snaggy side. So do make sure that you choose the secateurs that are correct for you. For myself, I would always go for a bypass secateur. You'll get a much cleaner cut. Keep these sharp and well oiled whenever you put them away. I mean, for instance, mine are in use daily. These have been in my hand pretty much all of my working day today. So I don't ever really put them down. So I make sure I oil them and sharpen them regularly. If you're moving between plants, you want to make sure that you disinfect these properly in between things. I do that with a little bit of Nemo oil, which I put onto a hanky, and I simply just wipe the blades between plants. Or certainly if I've got no disease problems in my garden, I certainly make sure that I wipe them as I come back into my garden from other properties that I've worked on that may or may not have disease problems in their particular gardens. So you also may need, if you are inheriting larger old roses which need some work, you may need a pair of loppers. These are relatively cheap. These are a pair from Wilkinson Sword, chosen by myself for work because they're really nice and long and slender. Really good for getting into small spaces if you need to stand away. Obviously, rose is particularly spiky, so sometimes you do want to get away from them and you don't want to be too close to them. These also, if you wanted to, look out for these. These come with a telescopic handle, so these are quite good as well for, again, for if you've inherited a really unruly climber, for instance, that you need to get some big stems out. So these are really good. Once again, keep these sharp, keep these well oiled, and also disinfect these if you need to between plants or certainly between settings. I'm not going to need those today because Bring Me Sunshine is only a year old. You also may need one of these. I carry one of these in my back pocket in my holster. This is a Falco pruning saw. Really good for removing larger branches. For instance, I used this one the other day on an apple tree. Fantastic for cutting branches up to 4 inches. Again, this is a Falco pruner. These aren't cheap, but these will last you an awfully long time if you look after them. Right, so that's the equipment that we're going to use today. Being an older gentleman heading now into my mid-40s, you will also make sure that you need one of these, a large kneeling pad. I'm going to be working at ground level today on Bring Me Sunshine, and we're going to go and actually start pruning that now. So if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to drop the camera and we're going to actually work out how we're going to prune this, and we'll talk you through some of the basic stages. Now, we have said in other tutorials before that you want to start with your rose pruning if you're a complete novice by looking out for the 3 Ds: the dead, the diseased, and the dying. Now, this particular Bring Me Sunshine doesn't have any dead, diseased, or dying wood. It's a really lovely, strong, vigorous, very young plant. However, this is the kind of thing that you're looking out for. This is a dead stem. And I nipped across the garden a couple of days ago before I did this tutorial on Instagram, and I cut this off of the Lady Gardener. Again, from David Austin Roses. That is now an 8-year-old plant, and quite often just decides that the stems that it has, it doesn't want to grow those anymore. It's going to send up a new stem from the bottom, normally absolutely smothered in flowers, and that's the leader for this year or next year, or maybe lasting 2 or 3 years. But this is the kind of thing that you're looking out for. You can see, I'm just going to cut a piece of fresh growth from behind me, and you can see this is the new growth from Bring Me Sunshine. Beautiful emerald green, lovely strong dark green growth, and this is the kind of thing you want to be looking out for. This is the dead, the diseased, and the dying, and this is the first thing that you need to remove. So as you approach your plant, have a look at it, and if there's anything that looks like this needs to be removed completely, all the way down to the ground, down to the rootstock if necessary. You'll quite often find that these particular types of bits of growth are actually caused by damage. They may have been chewed on by your dog. You may have caught yourself on the rose as you passed it with a lawnmower and damaged the stem. This one looks like it at some point had a nice leader of flowers off of it, and maybe it was dead-headed and decided that it didn't want it anymore. So this is the kind of dead, diseased and dying wood that you're first of all looking out for. Okay, so I'm going to drop the camera and we're going to start our pruning. Bear with me 1 second. Do talk amongst yourselves for just a moment while I do this. I need to be very careful because filming today with this my Bluetooth microphone on, I've had to take my phone out of its holder. So I do hope that it stays in the cradle. I'm just going to adjust the camera slightly so you can actually see the plant that we're going to be working on. Grab my gloves. Right. And I'm going to bring you ever so slightly forward so you can see the plant. So this is Bring Me Sunshine. I have two of these, which I'm really, really pleased with. They're here right outside our little stable in a corten steel planter. These were actually gifted to me by a company called Weather It. They are absolutely stunning and slowly aging down with a really lovely patina on the steel itself there. Right, so we actually in frame. There we go. Thank you very much for bearing with me. Right. I said in my other tutorials, you also need to make sure that if you're not a particularly experienced gardener, you may need to look at putting a pair of plastic goggles on at this point just to protect your eyes. However, I've been doing this for a long time and I really don't like having anything in my field of vision. So this is Bring Me Sunshine. As I said several times, this is a 1-year-old plant and we're going to start by trying to get this into actually some sort of shape. And the first thing we're going to do for safety purposes, health and safety purposes, we're actually going to remove a lot of this excess growth. You can see long, strong leaders. This plant is coming up to around 4 to 4.5 feet high when it's fully grown. So it's a really large, big rose. But just so you can actually see the actual quality of the plant, actually see the shape of the plant, all I'm going to do is just remove this excess growth now. Just cut it away. You don't need to pay any attention to what you're doing at this stage. Just remove the excess growth so you can actually start to see the shape of the plant. Don't worry about where you're cutting because we're going to be paying attention to our cuts in just a moment. So now the excess growth is gone. Just going to remove that lot there as well. So I'm not paying any attention to where I'm cutting. I've got plenty on this particular plant, so I'm just going to shorten all of those stems, and I now have good visibility of the actual plant itself, and I've got a good impression of what it actually looks like with all that actual flopping growth on it. Now, the only thing we haven't touched base with is actually when to prune your roses. You've got at least 6 to 8 weeks to get this task done. So please don't go out and into the garden and rush about thinking you have to do this. I'm doing these tutorials for you now, so you have a good bank of information ahead of you, and you've got plenty of stuff to watch back at another time if you need to recap and actually just home in on your actual technique itself. So you've got from now until the very end of March to prune your roses. And I've said this on several times before on these platforms. If you're not particularly experienced with this, sometimes these tasks are actually left best for a little bit longer. The longer that you leave them, the plant will start throwing up buds. And you can see from the growth that I've just cut off, Bring Me Sunshine under this little cover here hasn't quite finished dropping all of its leaves. But as soon as it has started dropping its leaves, you won't be able to see it, but I've got some really nice buds in front of me. Those buds are only going to get stronger, and you can always choose which ones you want. So if you're not particularly experienced or you're dealing with a very spiky rose, the country parson and Harlow Carr are sometimes left by myself right until the very end of March. The buds are really difficult to find under all of those thorns. Same with Munstead Wood. So you might want to leave those right until the very, very end of March so you can see the buds developing. Right, we don't have any dead, diseased or dying wood here on Bring Me Sunshine, and we've now removed the excess growth so I can actually see the plant. The next thing to do is to remove any weak or crossing stems. What we want to do with all of these rose pruning tutorials, the same as with fruit, is you want to create a nice open plant with a large amount of light and space in the centre of the plant, allowing lots of light and airflow, which are going to get rid of an awful lot of the pests and disease problems. So we do that by removing any weak growth at this point and any crossing stems. And as we move forward into our pruning, we're very, very simply repeating over and over again in our head, outward facing bud, outward facing bud, outward facing bud. Wherever we make our cuts, we're always selecting an outward facing bud which means the plant grows away from the center of the plant, again maintaining that lovely open bowl shape in the center. We often call it a chalice or a goblet shape to the plant, allowing lots of light and air. So first of all, we're going to remove the weak stems. I've got one down here which I don't like the look of. I'm taking that all the way back. Nice clean cut, and just discard that. I did mention in a lot of my other tutorials, you don't want to be putting your rose cuttings into your compost bin. Please feel free to shred them and then put them into the compost bin. But the best thing to do with them is actually incinerate them. You want to take this matter away from your roses in your garden and make sure that you're keeping them as clean and as sterile as possible to make sure you're not transferring pests and disease problems from one season to the other. If you do put these into your compost heap, rest assured they will come back to bite you at some point. They will spike you as you are turning that compost heap and give you a really, really nasty thorn, which after it's been in the compost heap for several months or several years is going to give you a nasty infection. Right, another thing that we've touched base with as we remove the weaker stems is sometimes you're going to remove the stem that your David Austin label is mounted to, and I've just done exactly that. I'm going to have to remove my gloves for a second. Just be prepared that this might be something you need to do. That particular stem was really, really weak. One of the stems that it was actually provided with from David Austin, and I've got a nice new cane. I'm going to make sure I keep the label. If you're not a complete and utter rose geek like myself, do make sure that you either draw a planogram of your roses in the garden so you know where everybody is, or you keep the original labels on them. Those labels will keep for almost a decade on your plant. So if you prune them, just make sure if you are removing that original stem, that was that one there, I've cut that off and discarding that now, that you've moved that label back onto another stem so you know what rose that you're looking at. Right, I've got a couple more weak bits to actually prune once I can get the gloves back on. So I'm just going to continue to remove the weaker stems, and then all we're going to do is we're going to open up the centre of this plant. So remove that weak stem there as well. That's all the weak stuff. Now we've got two crossing stems which you can probably see quite clearly here. We've got one coming through the centre of the plant and a nice strong one here. I'm going to select to remove this weaker one right down to whence it came, a nice clean cut there, and then we're into the situation where we've got a nice open amount of space in this plant. This particular kind of process takes several years, so please, if you don't have the ability to completely clear the centre of your plant in the first year, don't be too harsh on yourself. All you need to do is make a mental note to yourself about the particular pruning regime that you're entering into it, and then you can come back to it this time next year, and maybe you can take this stem out, which will give you your perfect shape. So please don't think the Rome was built in a day. These things come over time, and you should always be giving a rose at least 3 years in the ground to really reach its full potential, get to its full pruning shape. The colour will develop over the first couple of years, as will the fragrance. Don't forget, we all perceive fragrance very, very differently as well. It's not always the same scent that we will see, and a lot of us won't smell the same intensity as well. So if you eat a lot of strong fruits, or you happen to be a smoker, your sense of smell may be impaired and you might be smelling different notes. Right, so now we've removed the dead, the diseased, the dying. We've removed that crossing stem from the centre of the plant, and anything weak, we can now start our pruning. This is so simple. All you need to do is keep on chanting in your head over and over again. I do this all day, every day. Outward facing bud, outward facing bud. So you're then looking at reducing all of your stems all the way down to around 6 to 8 inches from the ground, creating a nice open space in the plant. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to reduce all of these stems, again selecting a nice outward facing bud. You want to be pruning around 6 to 8 millimeters above the bud. A nice comment on my last live over on Instagram about whether you needed to angle your secateurs. There's lots and lots of information about that, and whether the water will run off, or you're going to get infection, or a disease point. I mean, yes, I mean, it is entirely possible. I have hundreds and hundreds of roses, and hopefully you've all seen thousands of pictures logged onto social media. I'm always being told how great my roses look, and to be honest with you, I don't make sure I angle my secateurs. I've got too many roses to think and too many cuts to make. All I do is make sure I keep my secateurs sharp, I keep my secateurs clean, and I'm selecting that outward facing strong bud, and I'm not worrying too much about which angle my secateurs are. Please, if you wanted to, do angle your secateurs. You want the bud at the top at about a 45 degree angle down, away, so water runs away, but it's not something I've ever done or feel that you need to do. Right, this stem here I'm going to leave a little bit on the longer side so I can select that nice outward facing bud. It's literally just here. I'm going to shorten all these canes down now and get to around 6 to 8 inches from where they came from, selecting that lovely outward facing bud at all times. Very, very simple process. There's nothing complicated to this at all. Just make sure you continue to say to yourself, outward facing bud as you make every single cut. Choose the bud that is right. And sometimes you don't get them in the right place. Sometimes the rose doesn't quite look the way you want it to look. And at this stage, as we really, really get down to the very, very small bits, we've got this bud in the middle here. I've got another weak stem that I'm going to remove in the centre here just to continue to open it up. And that is us pretty much done. Nice, clean and tidy. This one here, this one to me looks a little bit on the long side. So I'm actually going to go back to that one now and I'm going to simply remove that down a little bit more. Now this one in the centre is a little bit long. I'm going to look to my left because I've got a pair of these, and if we can find another, we can. Right, I'm going to take this one down just a little bit short, so I'm going to go down to there. I don't think that's going to matter. That gives me a fairly nice balanced pair with the one behind me. The only thing left to do is to then, with your gloved hands, is to remove any fallen leaves from around your plant. These are obviously in pots and top dressed with horticultural grit, but please don't leave last season's leaves around your roses, especially if you had any mold, mildew or black spot during the season. Collect these up and incinerate these or put these off for commercial recycling with your commercial tip, or put them in your compost heap and ensure your compost heap gets up to a decent temperature, but please don't leave these around. There are plenty of tutorials from myself about what to do next. This rose over the next 6 weeks is going to need a really good feed. I will be removing the gravel, the top 4 inches of soil, and then redressing this with an organic compost from Eco Sustainable Solutions. That is a 100% organic derived compost made from green media, very much like you'd make in your compost bin at home. I go through around 10 cubic meters of that a year here, so that will give it a really good feed, and then I'll redress that with gravel as well. I hope you found today's tutorial helpful. I'm really sorry that on this particular platform I don't get to see any comments that you make, but please feel free to leave your comments under the video. I will post it as I always do to my grid, but thank you very much to everybody that's joined me. I will be doing this tutorial again here on YouTube. Join me at 1 o'clock UK time tomorrow. That's Saturday the 14th of January on Instagram, where I'll be pruning standard or tree roses. I've got several around the garden, so don't panic if you're only a YouTube user. I will be back on YouTube several days after that doing exactly the same tutorial on standard and tree roses. And our last tutorials towards the back end of the month, towards the back end of January, are going to be on climbing and rambling roses. Anyway, I will hope to see you all again soon. Thank you to everybody that's joining me, and I hope you found that helpful. I'm going to waddle off now and get the camera switched off, so please excuse me while I just get that switched off for you. I'll see you soon. Take care now. Bye.